Gainstaging. It's become a bit of a catchphrase around the web when it comes to mixing. Today we're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, why I don't do it, and a process that I think works better. You can have that entire process for free. Just go to recordingrevolution.com/5-step mix. So what is gainstaging? It can mean a lot of things. On its simplest level, it just means setting levels, getting the volumes correct. But people take it a lot further. In one sense, when you think of gainstaging, it could be as simple as when I turn a compressor on and off, that the overall volume of the track stays roughly the same. So it's not a lot louder or a lot quieter when I engage that compressor. That's one form, I would say, of gainstaging. But there's this whole other part that I would say is unnecessarily complicated, that is all about taking all the tracks in your mix and getting them to a certain measurable loudness level so that you can kind of systemize the process, I guess. And a part of it comes from this idea of analog recording equipment, which we have lots of like channel strips plugins that are modeled after classic analog hardware. And the argument goes, those pieces of hardware were really designed to receive a signal at a certain level within a certain range to sound best. That's fine, but I think there are some problems. So the basic idea is this, and I know this because I get these questions a lot, and so I'm wondering, like, where are people getting this idea? And the idea is, I'm going to take all my tracks in my mix, and I'm going to normalize them to a certain peak level. So minus 18 or minus 12 or something. And so I take everything in my session, whether it's 10 tracks or 100 tracks, and I run a process on it to make sure that all the levels are the same. And here's the first thing I would say about that. All levels and all tracks are not created equal. They're not supposed to be all the same. Let's take a traditional rock song. Drums, bass, guitars, vocals, keys, percussion. Should the lone shaker track be the same volume as the snare drum and the vocal? No. It's funny, that's another problem that I hear a lot in mixes. People make the shaker incredibly loud for some reason. No, shaker needs to be back in the mix and in its proper place. It does not need to be at the same level. And so I think while this approach is probably certainly well-intentioned, and maybe it works for some people, I find it to be unnecessarily complicated and even harmful for people who are trying to learn how to mix. If you are a professional and you like to get tweaky with this stuff, this video is not for you. If you're struggling to just get a mix to sound good, throw out this whole gainstaging thing. Because what ends up happening is you start to do a lot of math and not a lot of music. You start thinking in terms of LUFS values and normalizing to a certain dB and making sure everything is in its perfect place. And what I found is people who obsess about those things, their mixes sound terrible. They're so obsessive about, they think the cure for their bad mixes is some magical formula for setting the levels that will make the end result be amazing, and that's not it. That setting levels is important. I'm not saying we don't set levels, but trying to turn it into some sort of formula that magically just poops out great results is a bit of a fool's errand. And then just from a practical standpoint, if I have a mix with 5 tracks and then a mix with 100 tracks, and I have a process for setting those all to the same level, well, 5 tracks at one level will build up to a certain volume, but 100 tracks at that same level is going to build up to an even louder volume. So there's really no way that formula works unless you have the same number of tracks every time. So here's a better option. Here's my rebuttal to this kind of gainstaging fad, and it's what I call step 2 in my 5-step mixing process, and it's simply the static mix. All it is giving yourself a few moments to just work with the levels and the panning of your tracks before you reach for all those fun and fancy plugins that you love so much, taking the time to get the balance right between the tracks. Balance doesn't mean they're all the same level. Balance means they're all at the appropriate level. Just like if I'm singing in a choir and I'm singing a tenor part and I'm singing so loudly that everyone can clearly hear my voice over everyone else, the problem is me. I need to turn down. I don't need some crazy cool new singing technique. I just need to sing more quietly. That's what we're doing when we're balancing tracks in the static mix. We're saying, okay, y'all are a little too loud. Y'all are a little too quiet. You need to be over here. You need to be over here. Okay, now who's not being heard, or who's being heard too much still? The problem is a lot of people jump straight to slapping EQs and compressors and, tape saturation and all this other fun, good stuff on the tracks before the levels are even right. How can you hope to get any sort of a good compressor setting when the levels feeding it aren't balanced? Who cares if you have the perfect compressor setting on your snare drum if the overall snare is too quiet in the mix? You're literally spinning, not literally, but you're spinning your wheels, and you are literally taking longer to mix the song and working on stuff that you can't hear in the mix. A better solution is to just use a little restraint, hold off on throwing those plugins on there until you've spent time making it sound as good as possible without any plugins. And guess what happens? I've seen this time and time again. People who, for example, have gone through my mixing course, they say when they finally get this static mix thing and they actually try it, they're blown away by A, how good they can make it sound with just levels and panning, and then B, how much easier the rest of the process is, because everything is starting from a good place, a nice, balanced place. The rest of the mix becomes a lot easier. If you want to try out my mixing process, and it's something that you can try, and you can determine if it works or if it doesn't, it's going to work. You can have it for free. It's a 5-step guide. It's just a couple of pages. It won't take you long to read. Completely shift your paradigm of how you mix, change that process, and just watch what happens. It's going to be really fun. You can have that for free. Just go to recordingrevolution.com/5-step mix. Thanks for watching. Happy mixing.